Welcome again. This is your instructor, Joe Johnson, and this is a lecture for CTI 120, and we are on Chapter 9, Introduction to Network Security. After completing this chapter, you should be able to develop a network security policy, describe how to secure physical access to networking equipment, secure access to the data on the network, describe network security devices, protect the network from malware, and use tools to find network security weaknesses. Remember that network security should be as unobtrusive as possible. You're always going to have a balance where you are totally secure, and then at the other end of the spectrum, you're going to be totally open up to attack. So you've got this spectrum where you have no security. At the other end of the spectrum, you have no access, which is full security. And then you have a whole spectrum or a gamut in between. And no security would be like having your server out in a parking lot where people can come take pieces out of it. There's absolutely no security. No access would be like having your computer in a room that's not connected. The computer's not connected to the internet, and you've got a soldier outside with a machine gun, and you tell him, if anybody comes by this room, shoot them. In that case, nobody would be able to access the computer. The computer would be useless. In the other case, with no security, everybody would be able to access the computer. What you want is to be somewhere in the middle, right here, where you're secure enough so that you're blocking most attacks, and people can still use your systems. Okay? If we're totally secure, nobody would be able to use the system. If we were totally insecure or unsecure, nobody would be able to use the system because it would be unreliable. People would be stealing parts out of the server, things of that nature. So remember, there's no good security system where you're 100% covered, where you're guaranteed that there is no risk of hackers getting to your system. So, don't ever believe anybody when they say a system is hack-proof. It's not. There's always that possibility that there's going to be a security breach. So like it says in a bullet, you should allow network users to concentrate on the tasks they want to accomplish rather than how to get the data they need to perform these tasks. So you don't want security becoming a hindrance for people's productivity, if that makes any sense. But having a secure network is going to enable your organization to go about its business confidently and efficiently. So they are going to be able to use the system, but it's going to be reliable because you have a little bit of security in place. A company that can demonstrate its information systems are secure are more likely to attract customers. So think of large organizations that have been breached before. Think of Target, right? I remember when Target got hacked, they got everybody's credit card numbers and I think their driver's license numbers. There was like a whole bunch of information that got hacked from Target systems. And because of that, the customers were less likely to use their credit cards at Target because they were afraid that their numbers were going to be sold on the internet. Again, also partners or investors, if you're asking somebody to put money into your company, then you're going to reassure them that your company is still going to be there within a couple of years because it hasn't been hacked and its data destroyed. So there's all kinds of reasons for network security. Right? It's not just a luxury anymore, it's a necessity. One of the first things that you need to do, if you go into a company that doesn't have any security at all, the first thing you need to do is sit down and create what we call governance. And governance is going to be a framework of policies, procedures, standards, and mechanisms that allows us to ensure security on our network. So one of the first things you should do is create a network security policy. It's going to tell you about what's normal in the company. You can't expect your employees to behave properly if they don't have any idea what to expect of them. So security policy is going to describe what's the normal course of business. It'll describe whether the employees can come in and use their personal email accounts. It'll also describe whether they can come plug in devices they bring from home into your network. So things of that nature. The security policy should be easy for ordinary users, your end users, to understand and reasonably comply with. It should also be enforceable. A lot of people write security policies and there are no penalties in the policy for non-compliance with the policy. We're not out to get people. The IT people do not want to be the network police or the computer police, but we do want to ensure that the network is safe for our business to take place on. So you need to have some kind of teeth or penalty in the policies and have management support those policies. If management doesn't support the policy, then nobody's going to care about the policy. If there's no penalty for breaking the rules, people are going to break the rules. Right? An example in the book is you shouldn't forbid internet use during certain times of the day unless you have a method of monitoring or restricting its use. All right? So you shouldn't create all of these rules that you can't monitor or that you're not going to enforce. Right? So only write policies that you are going to monitor and enforce. Also clearly state the objective of each policy. If the end users understand why the policy is there, they're more likely to comply with it. A lot of people use this in parenting these days where they explain to their children, you need to do this because of this. They don't just make the rule and let people believe that it's just because they want to be difficult. They actually explain, hey, this is the rule and this is why it's here. And that usually works better. People usually cooperate more with those types of rules. So there are templates out on the internet created by NIST, created by all these different organizations and SANs that you may have heard of before, but there's some certain sections or parts of your security policy, and listed on a slide are some of them. One of them has to do with your security, your privacy policies, or your how you're going to use your customers' information. So, a privacy policy is going to describe what your staff, customers, and business partners can expect from monitoring and reporting. So, this is going to be circulated to your customers also, as well as your in-house staff. And it's going to tell them what's expected, what kind of privacy their customers should expect for their information. So, privacy is keeping things secret that shouldn't be out. It's going to be like personal information. All right. So privacy is different than security. Privacy is being able to maintain confidentiality of people's personal information. We should also have an acceptable use policy, or an AUP. You'll see them called AUPs. It's going to explain to your end users what's acceptable at work. All right. And it should be open-ended, meaning that it shouldn't cover an example of every kind of behavior that's forbidden, but it should give some overall principles of security so that people can make decisions on their own about things. It also gives you a lot of leeway when you're enforcing it so that you can say, well, this is covered under this part or that part. Remember, it should also tell them what is permissible. Okay. An authentication policy. We're going to describe to our end users what's required to authenticate them when they log into the computer, whether it be two-factor authentication, where I'm asking for a password and their fingerprint, or a different type of two-factor authentication where I'm asking them to have a cell phone to receive a code as well as a password. So that's how our authentication policy works. It tells our end users how many characters their password needs to be, and how they can use two-factor authentication. Internet use policy explains what constitutes proper or improper use of internet resources. This is really important for reasons of capacity on your network. If you can't control what's flowing across your network, then your network is not going to be reliable. You're going to have all of your employees looking at Netflix or streaming Apple Music, and it's going to eat up all of your bandwidth. So your internet use policy should have for example, a statement that says activities impacting bandwidth or high bandwidth applications, and then you can specify later on what those high bandwidth applications are. So, you can say do not waste finite resources, or do not waste bandwidth, and then later on you can define what's wasteful use of company bandwidth. Because if everybody streams Netflix, your internet's going to be really slow, and people are not going to be able to conduct business over that network. Access policies specifies how and when users are allowed to access network resources. So if you use a VPN where they're going to do work from home, it's going to be in this policy. Also, what times of the day can they come in and work? Which computers can they use? Those types of things are going to be in the access policy. An auditing policy is going to explain how things are monitored on the network. So, for instance, if somebody logs in from a station they're not supposed to be logging in from, the audit log would catch that, and an automated system would page somebody. So it's going to describe to the IT department and the security department what they should be monitoring. It's also going to communicate to the end users what types of behavior is going to be unacceptable, and alert them that you are watching for those violations. Data protection policy outlines the policies for backup procedures. Typically, a company is going to do backup virus procedures, virus protection and disaster recovery. What our end users need to do to protect their information on top of what IT department already does. An example of a data protection policy would be you have to have antivirus on any device connected to our network, and we have ways of enforcing that. So that data protection policy is going to give your end users some guidance on what should be, done on their computers to enforce hygiene on their end workstations. We're going to talk about levels of security now. So before we talk about levels of security, and we're making policies or making decisions about how much security we need to answer these questions. Number one, what must be protected? Is it just part of the network? Is it certain information? Is it certain servers? So what we do is we usually classify our systems into different groups. One group of computers would be maybe level 1. Level 1 might contain credit card numbers and social security numbers. Then maybe we'd have level 2 systems. Level 2 systems might have student grades in them. And then level 3 systems would be systems that don't have any information that's considered private. So we can decide what must be protected, and then we can organize our computers into groups. From whom should the data be protected? So we need to come and have a brainstorm about what kinds of things threaten our data, whether it be a hacker, whether it be employees on the inside of the company. We need to decide who we need to protect it against. What costs are associated with security being breached or data being lost or stolen. So we can use insurance estimates. We can use historical figures. Figure out how much it costs the company when your systems get breached. All right, that's going to be a big deal when we go to purchase equipment. We need to be able to show the business people, hey, this is actually going to cost less in the long run. When you get breached, it's $1 million. This security system only costs $15,000. It's a lot cheaper to put this firewall in than to be breached. So we need to know, we need to count the cost. How likely is it that a threat will actually occur? So we take the information from whom the data should be protected, and then we say how likely is it that a break-in or a flood or an insider will actually break into the system and steal the information. So we need to do, like I said in the previous step, historical records. How often does it happen? We also need to protect our systems from natural disasters. So we can figure out how often does it flood? How often do we have earthquakes? Probably never here in North Carolina. So we go through natural disasters. Remember, we're protecting the systems from not just man-made things or man or woman. We are protecting it from natural disasters. And then are the costs to implement the security and train the personnel to use a secure network outweighed by the need to create an efficient, user-friendly environment? So is it more expensive to put the security system in, or is it more expensive to be breached? When you get to court and somebody's suing you because of a data breach, this is going to be a big deal. They're going to weigh, hey, it was actually cheaper. It would have been cheaper if they hired somebody to implement a security than it is for all their records to get stolen. If that's the case, then they're going to hit you with like negligence and punitive damages, because they're going to say you should have known that it's actually cheaper to implement the security than to be breached. Right, so that's when you get in trouble. Now, if it's really expensive for the security system and the company never gets hacked, and you can show that the cost of the system greatly outweighs the benefit from it, then you might have a leg to stand on. But if it's the other way around, then the court's going to really hit you with a lot of damages. So we need to make a decision where we're going to have a security stance for our company or organization. One of the ends of the security spectrum, like I said, was high security. In those types of and where we have a lot to lose, we're going to have highly restrictive policies. Highly restrictive security policies includes features such as data encryption, complex password requirements, auditing and monitoring of computer and network access, intricate authentication methods, policies governing use of internet and email. All of that's really expensive to implement. Okay? So when you are going to put in one of these restrictive security policies, it's typically going to be at a bank or a hospital. These industries that are highly regulated, right? Like a hospital with HIPAA, or a bank with GLB. And then, government organizations, government entities that have the money to be able to do the level of security. Thinking of military with their classification systems. So that's an example of a highly restrictive security policy. At the other end of the spectrum, we're going to have open security policies. There's going to be simple or no passwords, unrestricted access to resources, no monitoring and auditing. The policy might make sense for a small company Maybe you have a really small company and you don't deal with all the sensitive information. You might have one of these open security policies. So what it would look like is maybe in workstations that automatically log in. It doesn't challenge them for a password. You can click on the network and get access to files, and it never challenges you. The end users might be backing up their own workstations. The end user workstations might control who has access to the shares on their computer. So they've set up shares on their network, and it's more of a peer-to-peer network. They're going to have antivirus on their servers and desktops. They're going to have backup procedures. Like I said, typically the end users are going to help with that. And then you're going to maybe have a server room. A lot of these places don't even have a server room. They just have all their switches and servers sitting in the office. Right? So that would be an example of one of these open security policies. Somebody that doesn't have a security policy at all, this is usually what it looks like. And it's typically small businesses. Securing physical access to the network. Remember, if somebody can get to the computer and put their hands on it, it's not your computer. Right? Again, it says on the slide, if there's physical access to the equipment, there is no security. If they can put their hands on it, they can unplug it, which would be an attack on availability. They could also boot it from a boot device and boot it to another operating system and copy files off the system, and there would be no auditing or trace logs of that going on. So your equipment that's sensitive, that has sensitive files on it, must be kept in a physically secure area. No matter how strong your login and name and password schemes are, if a person has physical access to your device, the access to the data is not far behind. Okay. Never have one of these systems with credit card numbers or anything like that sitting out in an office where somebody can get to it, put their hands on it. And it needs to be secured remotely in the server room. Okay. When you design the area that your business is going to be housed in, you need to make sure that they have rooms available to house your servers and equipment. You should have locked doors. You need to have enough power and fuses to run the equipment. Adequate cooling measures. Remember, there are certain temperatures that the computers need to be kept at, and certain humidity levels. And then an interference-free environment. You don't want to have microwaves and things of that nature around it. If a suitable room is not available, locking cabinets can be purchased to house servers and equipment in public areas. They sell these at Lowe's. You can go buy an equipment cabinet. It's a steel cabinet with a lock on it. And what you can do is just mount it in that cabinet, like your switch or your router, and attach it to the wall. So they do make those devices. If you want to think about an alarm system. They usually have that big metal cabinet where the alarm system is housed, and it's locked. Wiring from the workstations to the wiring cabinet should be inaccessible eavesdropping equipment. What that means is they need to be in raceways or in the walls. You shouldn't have your wires running across the floor. Your physical security plan should include procedures for recovery from natural disasters such as fires or floods. So that's called the business continuity plan, and that tells us how we're going or disaster recovery plan, and that's going to tell us how to recover from a disaster or how to keep doing business even though the systems are unavailable. If you don't have those plans, most of the time your business is not going to survive from a natural disaster. Physical security of servers continued. Servers often require more tightly controlled environmental conditions. Right? They generate substantial amount of heat. A lack of cooling can cause damage to the hardware components. So if somebody wants to attack your availability, they can attack your air conditioning system or your climate control. And if that goes out, then the servers need to be shut down, and then nobody's going to be able to access their data. Right? So you need to protect your HVAC, things of that nature. Maybe put it on the roof of the building and where people can't get to it. Power to the server should be on a separate circuit from other electrical devices. You don't want somebody's coffee pot in another department to blow a fuse and shut your servers down. Verify power requirements for UPSs. Make sure that you have the correct plugs for the UPSs. Remember, UPS, what it does is it shuts down your system correctly. UPSs do not keep your servers running for any amount of time. So the UPS stops data corruption. If you unplug your computer without shutting it down correctly, most of the time you'll have corrupted files on your workstation, and your operating system might need to be reinstalled. In terms of a server, if the power is pulled out, a lot of times you'll have data corruption inside of your database or inside of your customers' files. So you need to make sure that if the power goes out, the UPS sends a signal to your server and shuts it down correctly so that we don't have data corruption. Once we have data corruption, it's really hard to remove and get rid of. Remember, if you don't have a separate room for your equipment, locking cabinets are a must. Routers and switches contain critical configuration information. A user with physical access to these devices needs only a laptop to get into the router or switch. So what they would do is go in through the console port maybe, get into the switch, and then mirror the traffic that's going to that switch to a device and eavesdrop on all your network traffic. So we need to protect our routers and switches. Also, in terms of availability, changes that are made to the routers and the configurations can have disastrous results, meaning that they can take your entire network down and you'll spend hours and hours and hours trying to figure out what caused the outage. A room with a lock is a best practice for switches, having like a equipment room on every floor of the building. A wall-mounted enclosure with a lock is the next best thing. If you go into labs inside of the college, you'll see there is wall-mounted enclosures on the walls for routers and switches, and you can get those at hardware stores like Lowe's. Moving on to network data. So we talked about securing the actual hardware that the data is, that creates the data and stores the data. Now we're going to talk about transmission of the data. Okay. There are many different dimensions to securing your network data. One of them is authentication and authorization. That is proving who you are to a computer, and once you do, what can you access on the network. Then we have encryption. Encryption is taking my data and making it into a format that only authorized users will be able to read. Virtual private networks allow us to use public networks such as hotspot connections at Starbucks, and use them as if we were sitting on a secure network. Wireless security, the methods and settings we need to use to secure our wireless networks. We also have specialized security devices for network security, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and then we need to have malware protection, and that's going to run on the end workstations. It is going to run on our servers, and it might run on our intrusion detection systems. So we're going to talk about those things now. Remember that authentication and authorization, they sound alike, but they are different, but they work hand in hand. Authentication always takes place before authorization. So authentication is proving a user proving who they are, and then what they're able to do after they are logged into the network would be authorization. Think of a hotel that you check into. When you get to the hotel and you want to check in, typically they check your driver's license to see who you are. They secure a credit card. They typically want to know the make and model of your car. That is the authentication process. I'm checking into the hotel. Once you're checked into the hotel, they give you a card that allows you access to your room. Notice that the card does not give you access to everybody's room in the hotel, only yours. That is an example of authorization. It might also give you access to the parking lot, the weight room, and the pool, but it doesn't give you access to everything in the hotel. Now, there's a different card that the manager has that opens up everything. Those cards are an example of authorization. Once you tell me who you are, I can tell you what you do. We have a few different protocols that are used by your operating system and the network to transmit authentication information. One of them is called Kerberos. The reason it's so popular and you need to know it is that is the authentication mechanism that Windows uses. Once you log into the network, Kerberos, once you start to log into the network, Kerberos generates authentication information for you in the format of what's called a ticket. And then you show that ticket to the printer, you show that ticket to the database to get into the database, and the authorization information is embedded in that ticket. And that's called Kerberos, Kerberos. We also have something called Radius. Radius is something that we use when we dial in. So if you're connecting over the internet from a hotspot at Dunkin' Donuts, then Radius is what you're going to be using. Kerberos does not work over dial-up connections. Kerberos is only for domain-joined computers. So if we're logging in locally at the keyboard inside of the company, we're probably going to be using Kerberos. If we're outside the company dialing in from home or connecting from a coffee shop, then we're going to use something called Radius. Extensible authentication protocol is something that we use with Kerberos or Radius, and it is going to be a framework for us to add two-factor authentication, where you need a password and a fingerprint, or you need a password and a card. That's what EAP allows us to do. MS-CHAP is an authentication protocol, and the reason we need to know it, it's older and it's used by Microsoft. So any Windows system will support it. So it's Microsoft Challenge Handshake Authentication Protocol version 2. Sometimes we use that when we have systems where we can't use certificates or other methods. We also have MS-CHAP. It's an earlier version. It is not as secure. And then we have PAP, Password Authentication Protocol. You should never use PAP. It sends passwords in clear text. So these authentication protocols are ones that we need to know, but not all of them are used because they're older and not secure. We were kind of talking about smart cards and fingerprints before. All of those devices that we use with passwords is part of something called multi-factor authentication, or MFA. It requires a user to supply 2 or more types of authentication drawn from these credentials categories. So it's going to be something that you know. That's one type. An example would be a username and password. So that's in your brain. And then it's going to also have a group of authentication types, credential category that is called possession, or something that you have. So if you have a smart card, like your credit card with a chip in it, or a HID card, which is one of those contactless cards, or a good old-fashioned key, that's going to be something that you have. And then we're also going to It says inheritance. I think it might mean inheritance. I'm not sure. I'll have to look up that word. That's something that you are. So that would be like a fingerprint, a retina scan, or a voice pattern. Right. So the way multi-factor authentication works is you need to supply two of these three types of credential categories. So an example would like be the ATM machine. You go to the ATM machine, you have to have what to use the ATM machine. You have to have your debit card or your credit card to put in the machine. That is something that you have. And then after you put the card in, it prompts you for something that you know. That would be your PIN number. When you add two of these types of authentication, your authentication becomes multitudes more safe than just using credentials from the same type. Because what it would force you to do is, even if somebody knows your PIN number, they're going to have to steal your card. And even if they steal your card, they don't know your PIN number, they can't get money out. So imagine how complicated it makes it for the criminal to be able to get money out of the ATM machine. The way this is going to present itself on exams is they're going to give you examples of different types of credential categories, and it's going to ask you, are these from the same category? Like they might ask you, to get into the system, you need your debit card and your car keys. Would that be something from the same credential category? Yes. If it's from the same credential category, having two of those doesn't make your authentication any stronger. Having a username and a password and then a PIN number, putting three things you need, doesn't make it any stronger either, because they're all from the what your user knows category. So it needs to be one credential from different categories, from two different categories. So it might be a fingerprint scan and a card. That would be a strong authentication. Or it might be a fingerprint scan and a PIN number. That would also count as strong because they're from two different categories. When we're setting up authentication in a Windows environment, there are tools that are built into Windows that help us to make our network more secure. Windows OSs allow passwords up to 128 characters. Passwords should not be 128 characters. What happens when you give somebody a complex password? What happens when you give somebody a long password? They're not going to remember it. Their brain's not going to remember it, so they're going to write it down. So this is an example of your policies need to be strong, but they also need to be end-user friendly. They're always going to figure out a way around your system if you make it too difficult for them. So a minimum of 5 to 8 characters is typical. I would say closer to 8. It would take them longer to break that password. So the longer the password is, the longer it takes them to break it. So a minimum of 5 to 8 characters is typical, and we set that in Windows, and we'll see that on the next slide. Other passwords include maximum password age. That's how often they need to change their password. So typically everybody says maybe every 45 days. You could do every 90 days. Remember, the longer that your password is used, the longer a hacker has to break it. So there needs to be a balance between the length of the password and how often they need to change it. The longer the password, the longer it takes them. So you want to change your passwords more often. Another thing that the maximum password age does is it limits the access somebody has to your account when you don't know they have your password. If they figure out your password and you never change it, then they're going to have access to your account forever. If you change it every 45 days, depending on when the last time you changed your password, they might only have 10 or 12 days to use your account till they have to break your password again. So maximum password age really helps with security. Minimum password age. How often must you wait to change your password? This one's a little more confusing. Why would you not want your end user to change their password? Let's come back to that in a second. Enforce password history. It remembers your old passwords, the operating system does, and it doesn't let you reuse passwords. What end users hate remembering passwords. So what they'll do is they'll switch between two passwords back and forth. You don't want them doing stuff like that because if somebody figures out that system, they'll have indefinite access to their account. Unlimited access forever. So you want to set your password history. I think Windows can remember up to like 20, 22 passwords, 23 passwords. What you want to do is just set it high enough so that they can't have a system. What a lot of people do is they set a password like a base password like password, and they'll put a number behind it, 01, and then they'll say password 02, and then they'll say password 03. What you want to do is make it high enough so that they don't reuse passwords. Okay, so that's password history. Now, let's go back to minimum password age. All of these policies are going to be communicated to your end users. So they're going to know what the policies are. So they're going to know that you remember 12 passwords. So what people will do anything so they don't have to memorize a new password. What they'll do is they'll change their password 12 times and then go back to the original password. Believe it or not, people do that. So minimum password age makes them wait a day before they change their password again. That way they can't cycle through the 12 passwords, keep changing their passwords, and then go back to the original password. So minimum password age works together with password history. Password policies for a single computer can be set in a local security policy and administrative tools in your computer. So if you're using a Windows system at home, this is available on your computer at home. Let's see what it looks like. We load up that local security policy. We go under Account Policies, Password Policy. Here are the options that I have. Notice there's some that we didn't talk about. Password must meet complexity requirements. That forces them to use non-alphabetic characters in their password. That helps with things called dictionary attacks. Store passwords using reversible encryption. People say, why in the world would you want to turn that on? Sometimes you have older applications that are written in-house just for your company. So I might work in a grocery store and somebody wrote a script or a piece of software that's just for my company. It might need to access the passwords for authentication in that old format. So you would have to turn that on for the older pieces of software. The best thing to do would be to upgrade that software, but that's not always a possibility. So we should keep this disabled unless there's a good reason not to. A few more slides for passwords and authorization and authentication. When you're creating passwords, use a combination of uppercase letters, lowercase letters, numbers, and special characters. And that's the option that we had on the previous slide where it said password must meet complexity requirements. It forces our end users to use numbers and symbols in their passwords. Again, it stops things called dictionary attacks, which are really fast. An example would be using a passphrase instead of a password. So it's a phrase such as networking is cool, and then you replace the A's with at symbols, the I's with ones. It looks like they replace the O's with zeros. So it's not in the dictionary, so dictionary attacks wouldn't work on a password like that. And also it's easy to remember. So that's called a passphrase. People use Bible verses, people use lines from songs, lines from movies to make these passphrases. Just know that people have dictionaries of those also. So titles of movies, I have a dictionary for that. Famous sayings, I have a dictionary for that. So the hackers know what we do to secure our passwords, and they have countermeasures for those types of things. But typically, a passphrase will be stronger. Don't use passwords based on your logon name, your family members, or your pets' names, or your birthdays, or anything like that. People know that you pull information like that to make your passwords. So if there's anybody that knows your personal information that's close to you, they'll be able to figure out your password. Don't use common dictionary words unless they're part of a phrase. Don't make your password so complex that you forget it. What's going to happen then? You're going to write it down, or you're going to have to keep calling your boss to reset it. And that's not good for your employment. We even have restrictions where we can restrict logon hours and locations. So what I can do is say what times of the day that you can log into the Windows system. So for this particular system, logon is permitted in the blue area. Logon is not permitted in the white area. So for this particular rule set, people are not allowed to log in between 2 and 4 a.m. And it puts it into English down here. If you have trouble interpreting this graph, it'll say Sunday through Saturday from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. And that would be give the system a window to do backups. Nobody should be on the system. The system should be quiet when you're doing backups. I can also restrict which computers a person can log in from. So for this particular account, they can log on to the account jriley01, or they can log into the computer called engineering. That user will not be able to log on to any other workstation. So we're forcing them to get to an area that has cameras, basically, to use the computer. We also, in the operating system, Windows, Linux, and Mac OS, we're also going to have file system security, so that I can set permissions on files and folders. Remember, we always authenticate before we authorize. So I can specify users or groups of users and what access they have to files. Different OSs and file systems might use different terms. If you're in a Windows system, you'll have like read, write, modify permissions. On a Linux system, you'll have read, write, and execute. So they use different terms for the permissions, but they are basically the same. File and folder permissions are necessary tool for administrators to make network resources secure. So you can set permissions at a folder level or a file level. Remember that when I copy files, permissions do not follow the files typically. So if I'm dragging it to a file system on another disk, the permissions do not follow. They inherit the permissions of where you're dragging the file to. So if I drag a file from my hard drive to a USB drive, then the file is going to take on the permissions of the file system in the USB drive. If I drag a file from my system to a server system, typically it is going to inherit the permissions for the target system. So don't forget that when you move files, when you copy files, the permissions typically don't follow. And then when those files are sent across the network, the encryption doesn't protect them. Those permissions and the encryptions that you put on the disk system aren't used when you transmit the data over the wire. You need a separate encryption protocol for that, which we'll talk about, I think, later on in the session. So what we do is set up a VPN or something to protect the data while it's in flight over the network. Okay, we've been here for about 50 minutes. Go take a bathroom break. Go get a glass of water. Your brain is full for the hour, and come back in about 10 minutes, and we will finish up this chapter. We're about halfway through. Okay, we're back from break. You should be rested. You should be not having to go to the bathroom. Let's get ready to finish out this chapter, and you can even take a longer break if you want to watch the first part of this session one day and the second part another day. It would be just fine. Just make sure you're taking breaks, walking around, not getting blood clots. And like I said, giving your brain a rest, because you can only pay attention for so long. All right. Securing data with encryption. So this is data that's in flight, data that's crossing our network. So encryption prevents people from eavesdropping on our network using tools like a packet sniffer or protocol analyzer. One that's popular that you'd probably recognize the name is Wireshark. If I fire up Wireshark right now and listen to the network, I can see people sending files back and forth across the network. Those files are not protected when they cross the network unless we've taken special steps to encrypt them while they're in flight across the network. The first protocol we want to talk about is called IPsec. IPsec, is the most widely used method for encrypting data. IPsec is not actually an encryption protocol. It is a framework so that I can set up my encryption. Okay? It allows me to use all kinds of different things to secure my network, depending on my policy. If I want to use certificates, I can use certificates. If I want to use passwords, I can use passwords. If I want to use a much newer encryption protocol, I can do that. So the IPsec just allows me to make those encryption components work together. When we first connect to the systems, an association is formed. Think of that as authentication. The two devices, your computer and the remote device, are going to authenticate their identities. They can use a pre-shared key, they can use Kerberos, or a digital certificate. Okay. Remember, we said Kerberos is only when your computer is domain joined. That means the computer that is going to be on the company's network. So we typically don't use Kerberos when we do a remote connection. Okay. Pre-shared keys. Pre-shared key is a password, basically. It's a series of letters, numbers, and special characters that two devices use to authenticate one another's identity. So when I'm setting up IPsec between two routers, I log into one router and I put the pre-shared key in. I log into the other router and type the pre-shared key. That pre-shared key, the reason why it's difficult to use a pre-shared key is because you have to physically go to the other location to put that key in. If we take the pre-shared key and we send it over the network, somebody can eavesdrop on it. If we call them on the phone and give them the pre-shared key over the phone, they can eavesdrop on our phone conversation. They can tap our phones. If we send a pre-shared key through the mail, somebody can intercept the mail and read the mail. There's no good way to get that pre-shared key to the other end to put into the router. An example would be like me setting up an IPsec connection between a router here and a router in China. The best way for me to put that pre-shared key in the router in China is to go travel there and put it in myself. The government would monitor mail, phone conversations. There's no good way for me to get that pre-shared key over there. That's why typically, unless we have a small shop, we don't use pre-shared keys. Okay? The other thing about pre-shared keys is somebody if that pre-shared key is compromised, they typically aren't changed very often. Somebody will be able to eavesdrop on your information. You don't know they have the pre-shared key, and then they can continue eavesdropping without you knowing it. Yeah. So that's why you typically shouldn't use a pre-shared key. Like I said, unless you have a small shop. Kerberos authentication also uses keys, but the OS generates the keys using the domain structure. Digital certificates is our last option. They involve a certification authority, which costs money. So you got to go to VeriSign or DigiSign, one of those companies, and get certificates. So it costs money for that. So smaller companies probably won't go that route. They may if they want to spend the money for it, but typically it's a yearly fee to have those certificates. So if you want to send encrypted data, you must apply for a digital certificate from a certificate authority, which is a company that will vouch for you on the internet. They vouch for your authenticity or your so you don't have to send anything to prove who you are. The CA, the certificate authority, is going to say, yeah, I know him. He is who he says he is. That's how digital certificates work. Public certificate authorities such as Symantec or VeriSign, you might have heard, sell certificates to companies wanting to have a secure communication session across public networks. Remember, those are going to cost like $300 a year or more, depending on what you want to do with their certificate. So, like I said, digital certificates are free. I mean, not free, cost money. Pre-shared keys are free. At the school, it's not very much for me to walk to the devices that we're trying to communicate with. So we use pre-shared keys, but in a larger organization, keeping up with those keys and, updating them every, so many days becomes a hassle and becomes too much. It becomes a management nightmare. They might use digital certificates. We also want to encrypt our data when it's on our disk drive. If somebody grabs a hold of our system, then they can get the data off of the hard drive. Remember, if they can get their hands on the system, then they have your files. Okay? So typically what we do with systems that are easily stolen, like laptops, is we turn on something called encrypted file system. Or we use something called BitLocker. Okay? This thing down here, this goes under here. That's BitLocker. So encrypted file system uses your account, your Windows account, to encrypt files and folders, and it only encrypts certain files and certain folders. Okay? The user can boot your computer and get into it, but if he tries to get to the files that you have marked as encrypted, he can't get to those. BitLocker is a bit different. So this isn't EFS, this is BitLocker. BitLocker. BitLocker is only available in the higher levels of Windows, like it's not in the not home edition, like the personal edition of Windows. You have to be like a Windows professional or something like that edition to be able to use BitLocker, or maybe Enterprise edition, Enterprise license. What it does is it encrypts your entire hard drive, so they can't even turn on your computer without having a password. Right. So BitLocker is a good security enhancement for servers that aren't physically secure or laptops. So if somebody steals a laptop or a mobile device, a phone that has BitLocker on it, they're not going to be able to even turn it on. When it turns on, it's going to ask them for a PIN number. That's the user authentication mode. If the user doesn't have that PIN, they can't even start the operating system, much less get to the files that are encrypted. You can also run the laptop in USB key mode. That means you would have to put a flash drive into the USB port to boot the system. So this is something that the user knows. This is something that the user has. Trouble is, if you lose that USB key, you lose all your files. Problem with user authentication mode, if you forget the PIN number, you lose all your files. So be careful with BitLocker. It sounds like something that's really good, but if you don't keep up with the BitLocker PIN or the flash drive that you need to unlock it, then you're going to lose all your files. Okay. We also have transparent mode for BitLocker. Transparent mode would boot the system and you wouldn't even know it's running. You say, well, what good is that? It doesn't ask the end user for a PIN number. With transparent mode, the PIN number is stored on a key inside of the computer that can't not be removed. So there's a security chip that you can have built into your system that will generate that PIN number. And like I said, it can't be removed from the motherboard. So the motherboard is paired with the hard drive. And if you remove that hard drive from the system, you can't boot it at all. It doesn't matter whether you have a key or a PIN number. That hard drive is then going to be paired with the motherboard. Unless you boot the system in which the system was installed on, you're not going to be able to boot the operating system or get to any of the files. And that is called transparent mode, because the end user doesn't even know it's happening. But if they try to take the hard drive out of the computer and put it on another system to read it, it's not going to be able to read it. Now we know a little bit about IPsec. How does that actually show itself to end users? It shows itself in the form of virtual private networks. And you might have heard that term before. That's like a big thing now. It saved companies a lot of money. You've probably heard of a VPN before, especially with, they're starting to use VPNs with home systems. Okay? And what a VPN does is it takes a public network. So this is our internet connection. This is Dunkin' Donuts. So I'll put D&D. I'm on their Wi-Fi. I work for Starbucks, and I'm working on a new formula for coffee. Or maybe I have the formula for their mocha latte with this and that and all the other sprinkles put on top. And I want to send that information to Starbucks corporate network. Everybody monitors their networks. It's almost assuredly assured that Dunkin' Donuts is monitoring their network's traffic. I don't want to send that formula over the network to Starbucks from Dunkin' Donuts Wi-Fi access point, their hotspot inside of the cafe. So what I'm going to do is run a piece of software called a VPN client that's going to initiate a connection between my computer and the VPN server, or what they call a concentrator, at Starbucks headquarters. And it's going to make something called the tunnel. And a tunnel is a private little tunnel that's created over the public internet. And everything that flows within this tunnel is encrypted, so nobody can read it unless they have the certificate or the pre-shared key that I have set up. So even though Starbucks is running this internet connection, they can look down in the network traffic, and what they'll see is IPsec packets. They will not see my data, nor can they open it and view it. So they know they're carrying data, they just don't know what the data is. Okay? And that's what a VPN does. It allows me to use a public network, telephone system, public internet connection, and use it as if it's a private line, kind of like one of those lease lines that they talk about, where you have a cable that's buried in the ground and only you have access to it. It makes the internet act like that so that nobody can intercept what you're sending over the network. Okay? It encrypts it. VPNs use encryption technology to ensure that communication is secure while traveling over the public network. So the data's in flight. So EFS, encrypted file system, and BitLocker is used to protect our data when it's stored. After it comes off the disk and crosses the wire, then we use a VPN with IPsec to protect that data when it's crossing over the network. You can set up your Windows server as a VPN server. So that doesn't cost any extra money. You can just buy a copy of Windows Server and turn on the VPN server service and then dial into it from Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts and be able to have that private conversation. Know that encryption always has a cost, and the cost is going to be in memory and CPU cycles. So a lot of people don't want to bog down their server making VPN connections, so they buy a piece of hardware such as a VPN concentrator. So I buy a special device that's on the edge of my network, and the only thing it does is handles VPN connections, and that's just for capacity. If you're a small company, you may use your Windows server for a VPN server, but typically when you get a lot of employees dialing in for a VPN, maybe 100, something like that, you want to buy a piece of equipment, or everybody's access to the files on the server is going to be bogged down, and also the traffic that's encrypted sending back and forth is going to be bogged down. Okay? So again, this can be a piece of hardware called a concentrator, or this could be a Windows server, whatever you want it to be. All right. So Windows Server includes a VPN server solution. The role is called Remote Access Server Role. Windows supports 3 implementations of VPNs. You can use a protocol called PTP, L2TP with IPsec, or SSTP. Okay. SSTP uses certificates. So we talked about it a couple of slides ago, the different mechanisms. This is Microsoft's implementation of that mechanism where you use certificates. This is one where we use IPsec with something called L2TP. It is an improved version of PPTP, and it works with Windows systems, and it provides data integrity as well as identity verification. So they prove who they are, and it also checks to make sure the packets have not been tampered with. And then PPTP, if you have other clients such as Linux and Mac OS, this L2TP doesn't work with it, with those other clients. It only works with Windows clients. So you do want to use the PPTP protocol. Okay. All 3 implementations are enabled by default when you configure a Windows VPN. Okay. So you can turn these on. If you're worried about security, you can turn off the less secure ones. The PPTP is not as secure as the L2TP, so you can say, I don't want the server to use that one. This uses, like I said, certificates, which is really secure. So it's probably the most secure type of VPN connection you can have. So you can decide as a business what's going to meet your business needs and what's going to be too restrictive. When we set up a VPN, we can either set it as a site-to-site VPN or a client-to-site VPN mode. A site-to-site VPN would be, I have my bank, we have the main branch, we have a router on the edge of our network, And then it goes across the internet. That's my cloud, sorry. I'm not too good at drawing with the mouse. And at the other end of the internet, I have a router that's in one of those little ATM houses where they have the freestanding ATMs. When data hits this router, it becomes encrypted. So the tunnel is from the router to the router. So this is the VPN tunnel. It goes from router to the router. Once it gets dumped out onto the bank's network on the inside of the bank, then it's in clear text. So there's a point in which the data that's being transmitted is in clear text. It's when it's on the bank's network, on the internal network, and then when it's on the ATM hut's internal network. So basically, it's site to site or a gateway to a gateway. So it's from where my private network ends to where my private network begins on the ATM side. So that's not really set up for people dialing in from Starbucks. That's for businesses that have multiple WAN sites and they want to communicate between the buildings securely. The other mechanism is, again, we'll say bank. I'm a bank employee. The bank has their router or their VPN concentrator at the edge of their network. Here's the server. So that's the bank server. And then we have an internet connection. And then we have a router at my house. So this is the employee's home. Or, just as well, it could be Dunkin' Donuts. It doesn't matter where it is. He's sitting there with a computer. He says, I want to do business with my company. I have a piece of software called a VPN client. So I'll write that there, VPN client. I make a tunnel connection all the way from my computer to the bank's router. So again, it's not from router to router. It is from the computer to the router. So this information is encrypted on the internal network of your home or Dunkin' Donuts. It's encrypted after it leaves Dunkin' Donuts, crosses the internet, and it becomes decrypted when it hits the router of the bank. And we can also have a client-to-client or client-to-server VPN where it even encrypts it past their router all the way up to the actual server itself. All right. When you're shopping for a router that supports VPN connections for remote clients, look for one that supports VPN tunnels. So that if your business ever wants to turn on work from home, they can. If you don't have a router that supports VPNs or a device that supports VPNs, you're really taking a risk by allowing your employees to dial in from home. Because, like I said, everything over the internet can be monitored. So the benefits. So you're in the office of the CFO or a person with all the money, and you're trying to justify buying this expensive piece of equipment. It's going to enable mobile users to connect with corporate networks securely wherever an internet connection is available. Like I said, it doesn't need to be at home. It could be at a coffee shop or on a train, anywhere. Allows multiple sites to maintain permanent secure connections. So that would be in the case of our site-to-site VPN. So it also reduces the cost by using the ISP support services instead of paying for more expensive WAN support. So I don't have to pay for internet access for my employees. So I don't have to pay their internet bill at home because it's using existing connections. Okay? So I don't have to troubleshoot connections and things of that nature at employees' houses. Their ISP will do that. Okay, we're done with VPNs and encryption, protecting our data. Now we're going to talk about wireless networks. Wireless networks are more insecure, more open to attack, just by the nature of being wireless. Typically, with a wired network, we would have to plug into a port or tap one of the wires inside of a building to get access to a network. With wireless, I can sit out in the parking lot and access somebody's wireless network. So anyone with a wireless scanner and some software who gets within range of the signals can intercept your data or access wireless devices. There is a term that you need to know for security called war drivers. War drivers are attackers who drive around looking for wireless LANs. We have special software that we use. We just drive through the network and it eavesdrops on everybody's wireless networks and tells me whether they're secure or not. Also tells me which wireless security protocol they're using. So there are people who do that. One of the more famous computer hacking cases began with somebody driving through the parking lot of Marshalls and accessing their wireless network. And those are called war drivers. Wireless security must be enabled on all your devices. This is to stop the war drivers. And again, the war drivers don't target anybody. They're just driving through the neighborhood looking for that low-hanging fruit where they have a network that's easy to break into. So you don't even have to be a bank or somebody that somebody's targeting to attack. It can just be somebody who bumps into your wireless network while driving through the neighborhood. So these are the methods you'll see in your wireless device, wireless encryption that you can turn on. If you turn on this wireless encryption, these war drivers are going to have a harder time eavesdropping on your network. The weakest of all is called WEP. Wired equivalent privacy. It uses an encryption protocol called Rivest Cipher 4 or RC4. It's a stream cipher. You don't need to know all of that. Just know that the cipher is good. The implementation of it is bad. So they used encryption. They just did a bad job of implementing the encryption, and that makes WEP really insecure. For everyday users of computers, it provides protection, but if somebody, a hacker, gets close to your network, they can break your WEP key in less than 2 or 3 minutes. All they have to do is collect your packets. They get about 1 million packets, and they can deduce your key, your wireless phrase to get on your network. So don't use WEP. The only places that you should use WEP is places where you have equipment, really expensive equipment, that can only use WEP. Other places, if it supports a higher encryption, you should use it. Once they figured out WEP was not secure, they started coming out with a new standard for encryption. Remember, standards take about 10 years to be developed. While they were waiting, the wireless industry came out with WPA, which was a stopgap measure for a little more protection. When the protocol was, the standard was finally ratified, when it was finally formalized, it became WPA2. Okay? WPA2 is the strongest mechanism you can use. Okay. So any exam that asks you, WPA2 is the strongest, WEP is the weakest. Wireless security must be enabled on all your devices using the following methods. Continued. MAC address filtering. That's for smaller networks. Okay? So MAC address filtering, you turn on that feature, it'll only allow known computers to log into your wireless network. And when I say known computers, computers whose MAC addresses are contained within its access list. Okay? Again, this is a really weak method to introduce security to your network. Hackers can easily spoof MAC addresses. So once they figure out what MAC addresses are allowed on your wireless network, they can just change their MAC address to one that is allowed. So it's a little bit of security. It's better than none, but it's not a strong security method. And that's if your network is small. If your network is big, this becomes a nightmare keeping up a list of devices that are allowed to get on the network. And then removing them when those employees leave, it just becomes a management nightmare. So for small networks, it would work. Larger networks, you don't want to use it. Service set identifiers. It's a label for your wireless network. So when you see the words pop up at the bottom of your Windows box or your phone and says this network is available, that's the network's service set identifier. That's what the technical name for that name is. Right. So when you see the network called Linksys 5G or whatever name comes up, that's called the SSID. Each client must configure its wireless NIC for that SSID. So you pick that wireless SSID and it associates with that wireless network. Okay. If you have money, it costs a lot of money, do a site survey. You can do one yourself with your wireless device, but there's companies that you pay to come in and do this. And what you want to do is try to position your access points, your antennas, so that only the required areas are covered by the signal. The slide flipped. So position your antennas so that the wireless network doesn't leak out into the parking lot. So maybe put them towards the center of the coverage area. If you're in a building, put them in the center of the building so the outer edges of your wireless network don't leave the walls of your building. That would make it more secure because they'd have to come into your building to attack your wireless network. If you're using WEP, remember we should only be using WEP if we have older devices. Change the encryption key manually on a regular basis. Like I said, that's a nightmare. You have to keep communicating the WEP key to your end users over and over and over. And if it's a WEP key that you give your employees, they almost definitely give it to their spouses so that they can use it, so it gets out. Consider upgrading all your devices so they support WPA2 or the newer standard WPA3. When possible, use MAC address filtering, allowing only known addresses to access the network. Remember, that's when we have small networks. We can also harden our network security devices such as routers. On a router, we can turn a router into a firewall by using the access control list. The router's main job is to route packets, as we've already covered in previous chapters. But if we're a small company and we cannot afford a full-blown firewall, then we can set up an access control list in that firewall and say, allow traffic from these IP addresses, but not from these. Allow this type of traffic, web traffic, but not SQL traffic. We can specify the types of traffic, who we talk to, and we can use other criteria to decide how we want to allow access into our router. The best way is to get a specialized device, and we put these specialized devices on a network perimeter. Network perimeter is the outside edge of your network where you connect to the internet. Okay? So the network perimeter is the boundary between your network and the internet. Firewalls and intrusion detection And prevention systems are examples of these network security devices. A firewall is a piece of hardware that inspects packets going in or out of the network, and then discards or forwards these packets based on rules. Like I said, you can say what IP address they're coming from, what service they want to use, what time of day it is, the protocol they're using. Like if you don't want them to use ICMP, you can set that in there so that they're not able to ping your network. The firewalls are a lot more flexible than the routers and allows us to limit the traffic that comes in and out of our network. We typically put these firewalls on the hard edge of our network, right, between the private network and the internet. We can also have a software firewall. You have one built into Windows in your OS, and you can control what traffic goes in and out of your computer. So we have a device we put on a network that protects our network, and then we have a device that if they break through the network protection, they have one on your operating system. What we want to do is when we set up our security, we want to layer it. Okay? So we have layers and layers of security so that one failure of a device for security doesn't give them entrance into our network. Once they break through the Cisco iOS firewall or device, then they're going to have to break through the firewall on my machine. So we don't want to put all of our eggs in one basket. We want to have a depth to our defense. That's called defense in depth. And we want to put layers to our security on our network. Remember, firewalls protect against outside attempts to access resources and malicious packets intended to disable the network. These malicious packets could come from an employee. So it protects us on the outside. It protects us also on the inside from getting flooded with information, flooded with packets. Denial of service attack. You can also use firewalls to restrict users' access to internet resources. Maybe you can block certain internet websites. Maybe you can block certain types of traffic, such as instant messenger traffic, right? Those types of things. After you install the firewall, you must build rules that allow only certain packets to go in and out. So it could be based on the source and destination of the packets or these protocols. Like I said, if you block ICMP, then the users can't ping. If you block HTTP, they can't surf the web. Okay. More intelligent firewalls can also determine a packet's context. Well, those are called stateful inspection firewalls. And it looks at the connection. If the connection is initiated from the inside of the network, it allows it. If it's initiated from the outside of the network, it does not. We can also filter content with these firewalls. An example would be a Palo Alto firewall. It looks in the application layer, and I can block traffic from objectionable websites. So you can put a filter on there for porn, and it drills. It looks not only at the website they're connected to, it looks in the packet to see if there's any porn in the packet. If it does, it blocks it. Another example would be DLP, data leakage protection, or data leakage prevention. And what that does is it looks in the packets for any number that is formatted like a social security number. So even if your employee gets tricked into sending social security numbers out in an Excel sheet to somebody out on the internet, the firewall will look at that spreadsheet and say, look, they got numbers that are number, dash, dash, number, and say, that looks like a social security number, or that looks like a credit card number. And what the firewall will do is it'll block that connection. It'll stop your employee from sending out that information. So the firewalls are really neat with the content filtering. They can really do a good job of preventing a disaster on your network. As I said before, you can use a router as a firewall. Remember, routers are just supposed to route packets. Using them as a firewall slows your network down. Okay? So your network administrator is going to create access control list in the firewall. And remember, we said you should use defense in depth. We might put rules in our firewall and then put the same rules on our router so that if somebody gets past the firewall, then the router stops the traffic. No? That might be something that you might want to do. But remember, when I use a router as a firewall, anything doing with security takes up resources. The router is going to perform slower. We can also use something called network address translation. Network address translation allows you to have 1,000 computers on the inside of your company with private IP addresses. So something from the 192.168 range. I don't have to pay for those IP addresses because they're private. Has something from that range. And then when it gets to the router, all of these 1,000 computers share an IP address on the outside. Okay? And what that does is it hides who the person on the inside is. So it gives you some kind of privacy. So NAT can also improve your network security by hiding the source IP address of the computer that is initiating the traffic. So we can use NAT, network address translation, not only to give us more IP addresses so we can use the internet, we can also use it to improve security. Okay? When NAT is used, an external device can't initiate a network conversation with an internal device. So the traffic is going to have to start from here and ask for traffic on the internet, and then it's going to allow it back through. If I have a hacker on the internet that's sending files or attacks, if we're using NAT, the outside person cannot initiate communications with anybody on the inside when we're using NAT. So that really improves our network security. Another type of network security device is an intrusion detection system. It looks at every packet and looks for traffic patterns. We can have one on our network, just like a firewall, and we can have one on the host. Right? So we can install on the computer, on a Windows computer. We can also install IDS for the network. The network can catch network-wide attacks. So you place it in a place where it can see all the traffic on the network. It looks for things such as virus signatures. So it looks for bit patterns in the traffic to tell you if there's a virus on your network. It also looks at things like host sweeps or ping sweeps. If somebody's pinging all of the computers in your network, that's typically a prelude to an attack. A network-based intrusion detection system will notice that and send you an email or a page saying somebody is attacking your network. So it's an automated system that watches the network traffic so that you don't have to, and then it alerts you when things happen on the network. This host-based intrusion detection system can also be installed on something called the honeypot. A honeypot is a computer that doesn't actually have any data on it. It is as it is used as a decoy, and it lures potential attackers. I don't know if you've ever heard of it before, but honeypots are computers that aren't used by anybody in your company. And what it does is an early alert system that allows you that somebody is scanning your network or trying to access your computers. Okay? Don't think that the honeypot is used to gather evidence to be used in court. Typically, it can't be used in court. Okay? What the honeypot does is it gives you an alert that somebody is on your network trying to infiltrate your network. and that buys you time. So you're not waiting for the computer to be hacked anymore. When they start feeling around your network, they start trying to pivot through your network, then you have an alert and it tells you, hey, somebody's doing something funny on your network. With the honeypot software, you can have that system impersonate any operating system you want. So you can have it look like a Linux system. You can have it look like a Windows system. You can have it look like a Mac. So it has different profiles that you can set up so the attacker thinks it's a certain operating system. Typically, they name the honeypot something provocative, like they'll name it credit card server or password server or patient information server, something like that, that would attract the attacker to go get it. When they try to connect to it, the honeypot alerts you, and then it employs all these techniques to slow the attacker down. So the honeypot is supposed to act like quicksand. While they're trying to break into the honeypot is giving them slow responses. It's giving them fake error messages. It does all kinds of things to have them try to continue to break into that honeypot while you have time to cut off their access. Remember, we don't use it as evidence. Honeypots usually can't be are not admissible in court like that. People scream entrapment, stuff like that. So the real reason you use the honeypot is to give you an early alert that something fishy is going on in your network. So notice here in this network, they have taken an intrusion detection system and put it in their DMZ. And then, like I said, it's not called IDS, it's called credit card server. Something like that. So when the person from the internet connects to it, goes to the DMZ to access the web server, maybe broke out of the web server, and starts trying to pivot from system to system, they're going to hit this IDS system, and it's going to alert you that they're in there. Intrusion prevention system is similar to an intrusion detection system, but an intrusion prevention system takes countermeasures. So there's an automated system that tries to stop the attack. So it doesn't depend on somebody getting a page and coming into work and trying to stop them. The intrusion prevention system takes action to try to stop them. Countermeasures include reconfiguring a firewall. So it adds a rule to the firewall, don't talk to this person anymore. It might reset the connection between the source and destination, so they have to reconnect. And it keeps doing that to slow them down. It can also turn off the link between the inside and outside networks. So it just shunts that connection, and then all internet access is turned off for the company. You decide what it does. The problem with these intrusion prevention systems, if somebody knows that you're using it, they can trip it and make it disconnect your internet connection, and then you have a denial of service attack. So there's a double-edged sword. I would take caution against a device on your network making changes to your network. That's, can go haywire real easily. Malware is any type of software that prevents a nuisance or a threat to the integrity of a system or a network. So malware includes worms, viruses, trojans, scareware, adware, any kind of that software that you get from the internet that tries to steal your information or spy on you or destroy your data. That's called malware. It's all one thing, and it's short for malicious software. The way you get this malicious software on your computer is you download programs that you think do one thing and they do something else. I bring home files from home to work. Okay? And your kids are on your computer and they have this virus, and it travels from computer to computer through files. Open an email attachments. She might open up a macro virus in your email, and it might make more emails to people in your address book. Okay? That would be an example. And browsing unsafe websites. You go to a website and it puts an adware on your computer. So all of these advertisements keep popping up when you go to different websites. So those are the typical behaviors that we take part in that gets this malware on our systems. So virus is a program that spreads by replicating itself through programs and documents. So it embeds itself in files. And then the files are carried from computer to computer. So you put it on a disk or a USB drive and you carry it to another computer, or you send the file to another computer and the virus travels to that computer. Remember that a virus needs a host file to replicate and to work. So it's transmitted through files. So viruses are pretty easy to detect because we can detect a change in the file. So when a virus infects the file, if we're monitoring the files, we can tell that the file is changed. And then we can take action with antivirus software. Worms is a type of malware that doesn't require a file. It stays in the memory of the computer. So it's a self-contained program that just needs a computer connected to the network. That's how worms spread, over the network. They don't spread through disk. They don't spread through files being copied from system to system. They stay in the memory of the computer, and if the computer is connected to the network, it finds vulnerable systems and it travels over the network to their systems. They're spread by email attachments, instant messaging. A true worm, a pure worm that's not a virus, if you turn off the computer, the worm is gone. You turn back on the computer, your computer gets reinfected with the worm. You can also make the worm create a backdoor, which gives an attacker another route into your computer. So again, viruses require files. Worms don't require files. They stay in memory. So they're less, unless you're scanning the memory with your utility, you're not going to see the worms because they don't infect the files. They're harder to realize that they're there. A Trojan horse is a piece of malware that you download. You think it's a game and it does something else. It's a rootkit. Yeah? So it doesn't infect other files. It's not one of these memory viruses. Every time you start up the game, it starts a connection to a server and allows somebody to eavesdrop on your computer. It's a Trojan horse. A rootkit is a form of malware that takes over the operating system. You can find them on Windows, Linux, and Unix. They replace your operating system files, and there is no way to detect them because you're asking the operating system to scan. So the operating system has been replaced, so the operating system can tell the antivirus scanner, no, there's no virus here. Once they have a rootkit on your system, it's very difficult to detect, and basically you have to reformat the computer because your OS is corrupted, your operating system's corrupted. So basically you take over the computer not at an application level, but at the operating system level. A hoax virus is a virus, and you get users to break their own computers without being aware of the consequences. One of the ones that they had was Microsoft had a utility inside of Windows that looked like a teddy bear, the icon for it. So you go into the Windows folder and there'd be an icon of a teddy bear, which is kind of strange. So they would send out emails using social engineering, using trickery, and get these people to delete that file, and it would break their computer. A logic bomb is a time-dependent malware that's activated when a particular event occurs. An example would be the Code Red virus, which on a certain day would attack the website of the White House. That's an example of logic bomb. It doesn't do anything until a certain time and day, and then all of a sudden it activates. That's a logic bomb. Spyware type of malware that monitors or controls part of your computer at the expense of your privacy. So they're not trying to destroy your files. They're not trying to encrypt your files, sell your files back to you. All they're interested in is spying on you and selling that information to somebody. For instance, they know they're looking at your internet browsing and they notice you're looking for boat anchors. then all of a sudden you start getting all these advertisements for boat anchors. That's behavior of spyware. Spam is more of a nuisance than a threat. It's unsolicited, undesirable email. Every desktop and server should have anti-malware or antivirus running. Should include antivirus and anti-spyware. Most virus protection software is designed to detect and prevent worms. So it scans the file system, but it also scans the memory to look for worms. A virus scanner residing in memory should be used so that every program or file document that's accessed is scanned. So when you open it, you open a file, it should scan it when you open it, when you access it. Microsoft includes Windows Defender with Windows 8 and later versions. It contains antivirus and anti-spyware. It's installed and enabled by default and automatically updated on a regular basis. There's really no control of the features and stuff like that of Defender. That you can't control them very well. It's made to be an automated system that comes with the OS. It's no replacement for full-blown anti-malware software. Windows Defender only scans for like the most popular viruses that are out there. So it's better than nothing, but it's not as good as an anti-spyware or anti-malware package. When you install an anti-malware package, it should disable Windows Defender. You should not ever have two anti-malware pieces of software running at the same time. It'll really mess up your computer. So typically what we'll do is, if we want to stop network attacks from hackers, we need to figure out what they do to attack our network. So we do things called security assessments or penetration test. We do those internally, and we also might hire somebody from the outside to come in and test our network. The objective being is we want to find the security holes in our network before the bad guys do. So you hear terms black hats and white hats. It goes back to the westerns, where the cowboy that was good always wore the white hat, and the bad guy was always in a black hat. And they just did that so that the audience would definitely know this is a bad guy. Right? So black hats are bad guys, white hats are good guys. White hats use the term penetration tester for their consulting services. So you can get a certification called the Certified Ethical Hacker. I have that certification. You can also become a certified pen tester. And you sell your services breaking into networks for people. You don't do any damage. You're working for the company, but you find their weaknesses in their network. White hats try to hack into a network to see what types of holes exist, not hoes, in a network security and close them. So you're going to have a deliverable at the end. You're probably not going to be part of the fixing of the holes. You're going to give them a report. These are the holes in your network, and their IT department is going to fix those holes. We use a lot of command line utilities when we try to pen test your network. Pen test is short for penetration test. And we use ping, we use traceroute, finger, and NSLOOKUP are some of the utilities. You can look up those on your own. I have tools that are called ping scanners. It's an automated method for pinging a range of IP addresses. I can use mass scan is one of the utilities I can use. I can also download something called Nmap that allows me to ping hundreds of computers' IP addresses simultaneously. So what I'll do is I'll look up your IP range for your company, and then I'll run one of these ping scanners and find out which IP addresses are used in your company. So if your computer responds back, I know that computer is turned on. So ping just tells me if the computer's turned on. After I get a list of computers that are turned on, I use a port scanner. Port scanner determines which ports are open, which services the computer is running. So if I hit your computer and port 80 is open, I know you're running a web server. If port 21 is open, I know you're running an FTP server. If port 25 is open, I know you're running a mail server. So there's all these different ports I scan using a piece of software. Again, I use Nmap to do that. And the port scanner will determine what ports are open, and it'll tell me typically what versions of software you're running. So it'll tell me it's a web server, and it'll do something called a banner grab. It'll tell me IIS 6. And that tells me all I need to know to craft an attack against your system. Whois is a utility for discovering information about an internet domain. I can go to GoDaddy and or any organization that sells internet names and find out information about your company by doing this Whois query. That allows me to figure out how your network is set up by using Whois. And you just typically you go to like GoDaddy.com. You scroll down all the way to the bottom of the web page, and there's a link that says Whois. You type in a name of a website, it'll tell you the physical location of the person that registered that name. And it also gives you the IP address of their DNS servers. And from there, you can launch your attack and figure out their DNS range, their IP range. Here is an example of a scanner. This is a ping scanner. It's called NetInfo. And what it's done is I've given it the address of this entire network. This is the broadcast address. So this piece of software interprets that it wants me to scan the whole network, and notice it did. It told me that this is the name of the computers. These are the physical addresses, the MAC addresses, the IP addresses of those computers, and they are on. Okay. So notice I can tell that these, just by looking at the names, are servers. Server 1, Server 2, Server 3. That's probably what I want to focus my attack on. This is probably their DHCP server. So I'm mapping out their network just by pinging and getting the names of the computers. This is their update server where they do their Windows updates. Now, one of these can be a honeypot. They could name it something interesting like that so people will go after it. But typically, a company's not going to have honeypots. That's more advanced for a more secure network. I can just look at the names of these and figure out which computers are on and probably what they do. This is a ping scan, what it looks like. This is the same tool, NetInfo, and I'm running a port scan. Okay. Notice it found that on this particular computer, 192.168.123.102, it told me ports 135 and 139 and 445 are open. If I look that up on the internet and I look at which ports those are, that tells me that this is definitely a Windows system, just because of the ports that are open. This is file and folder sharing in Windows. This is NetBIOS, which is only used by Windows. This is Active Directory, which is used by Windows. So that's what these ports tell me. It's a Windows system. So just by running this port scan, I figured out what OS this computer's running. Once I figure out the OS, then I can craft my attack. They can also, pen testers can also use protocol analyzers. Allows me to capture all the traffic that's crossing the network to tell me which protocol services and utilities are running on the network. If you use a protocol analyzer, you need access to the network, meaning you need to tap the wire. Finger allows you to tell who's logged onto a system. You can turn it off in Unix and Linux. Because if somebody connects to your Linux system and runs Finger, it'll actually tell them information about your users. You don't want them to do that. And to protect against protocol analyzers, you should not use hubs. You should use a fully switched network. After an attacker has discovered the resources available, the next step might be gaining access. So they might have a scanning tool that looks for devices that have no password set. There is a database on the internet that scans the internet constantly looking for internet connected devices with default passwords. You go to that website, you just click on the link, you pull up somebody's webcam. It's already done all the work for you. All you do is you click on it, click on the link, it pulls up their webcam, you get the webcam of a hotel. And it's people that have installed these devices and never changed the password. It's people all over the world that does that. So this website is like Google, but instead of searching for files or websites, it searches these devices on the internet so that you can find cameras, servers, copy machines that have the default password set. Remember that the finger utility can be used to discover usernames. That's half of the information you need to log into the system if you're not using multi-factor authentication. So I can glean information from using fingered, which is why you should disable it. Linux and Windows have default administrator names that are often left unchanged. So the administrator for Windows is called the administrator. The administrator for Linux is called root, correct? So you look for those accounts. No sense in breaking into a user's account when you can break into the God account or the administrator account that has access to everything. All right. A denial of service attack is an attack on a user's accessibility. So denial of service or DOS attack overwhelms or ties up your network bandwidth so your legitimate customers cannot get on your network. 3 common types of denial of service attacks are packet storms, where I'm just inundating you with UDP traffic. They typically spoof their source address so you can't tell who sent it. It just overwhelms your traffic, overwhelms your internet connection with traffic. A half-open SYN attack uses the 3-way handshake, and it ties up your server, not your bandwidth. It uses all of the memory in your server by making connections to it that are not legitimate connections. I can also send a ping flood, which uses ICMP, and I send a large number of ping packets to a host. Your computer has to process those, so they tie up your CPU cycles and your bandwidth. A distributed denial of service attack is even more deadly to your network. It uses many systems to attack a single target. So they get spyware, they get viruses on computers on the internet, and then they get 1,000 computers, and then all of a sudden those 1,000 computers start flooding your network with traffic. So they own basically that botnet. They own all of those computers in different countries because they have a virus on them, and then they use those unsuspecting users' computers to attack your network. We can set up the firewall, use access lists, virus scanners to try to stop these denial of service attacks, these distributed ones, but they're really hard to stop because most of the computers that are infected may be your customers. So not only are you blocking the computer from attacking your network, you're blocking your customer from placing orders online. So distributed denial of service attacks are more difficult to deal with. No matter what you have in place, intrusion detection systems, firewalls, all of this stuff we've been talking about, you always start with the security policy that maps out your overall security plan. That's where you start. So if you're in a company that doesn't have any security at all, that's where you should start making out this policy. And then from the policy flows the tools and controls that we use to enforce that policy. This has been a summary, just scratching the surface of cybersecurity and internet security. In fact, cybersecurity has become its own branch of IT because there's so much stuff that you need to know. So it's become like a specialty. You know how you have special doctors in the hospital that do hearts and brain surgeons. Within IT, you have security specialists that just handle all of this stuff that's going on your network. Also, having an IT security department is going to stop conflict of interest. Typically, if your IT department's doing their own security, they're going to try to hide things that are found on the network to protect their jobs. If you have a separate chief information security officer in a different department, they don't have a horse in the race, so that you can get better audits from a full security department. If you have any questions, send me an email. And thanks for looking through this lecture. And I hope to see you at next week's lecture. Have a great week.